Beginning in verse 6 of Colossians chapter 2, Paul turns a corner by helping these new believers to see how they can live for Christ. Imagine Epaphras sitting outside Paul's prison cell and saying something like this: "Paul, you need to help me with this problem in Colossae. These new Gentile believers are being told that they need to observe all of the Jewish feasts, and they need to abstain from all sorts of things according to Jewish laws. Maybe if you write to them and tell them that Jesus is enough, it would carry more weight. And Paul, don't even get me started on how these Jews are being impacted by the pagan belief system around them." Now, imagine that what we're reading is Paul's response to this local elder's concerns. So as Paul writes in this passage, he mentions that Jesus is the head of all rule and authority. To understand this statement in its original intent, it is important to know that the pagans of the time believed that the gods of nature needed their respect so that their livelihoods would not be negatively impacted. You see, these local pagans believed that hundreds of spiritual forces controlled their lives. They lived with a constant fear that these spiritual entities needed to be appeased. They needed to keep these forces happy, so they thought. This fear led to things like astrology, magic, and other religious superstitions becoming pretty big business in Colossae. So imagine that the local church leaders were having to instruct their people about Christ in the middle of such a culture. So when we are tempted to get discouraged because we're surrounded by a society that consistently contradicts our belief system as Christ followers, we have to consider a few things. First of all, we are not the first generation to deal with such cultural pressures. It started in the first century. Secondly, rather than being overwhelmed by the surrounding apostasy, we should instead take the challenge to mature in Christ and persevere in the midst of false teachings and godless influences. Paul clearly does not make maturity in Christ an option for a select few. We are all required to mature in our walk with Jesus. Thirdly, we must remember that light has its greatest impact when the surrounding is the darkest. We've got to resist the urge to relate to the darkness by dimming our light. Only by shining the light of Christ with clarity and commitment will we truly impact a fallen culture. Yes, the culture today is desperately dark. But what an opportunity is ours if we will live as light in the midst of this darkness. Compromising our standard is not the answer. Refusing to study the Word and grow in Christ is not an option. So let's keep looking at how Paul was instructing these Colossian believers to live by the book.